Mongolian Death Worm. The Mongolian death worm's native name, Olgoi-Khorkhoi, means intestine worm, due to its red blood-like color and size, which is the size of an intestine. It has been described by many as being from 2 to 7 feet long, having the ability to spit out corrosive yellow saliva and to generate blasts of electricity. However, this latter power is thought of as being folkloric by the nomads of the Gobi. Western culture has come to call this monster the Mongolian death worm. Mongolian nomads believe the giant worm covers its prey with an acidic substance that turns everything a corroded yellow color. Legend says that as the creature begins to attack, it raises half its body out of the sand and starts to inflate until it explodes, releasing the lethal poison all over the unfortunate victim. The poison is so venomous that the prey dies instantly. Livestock and humans are supposed to be their main prey. Because Mongolia had been under Soviet control until 1990, very little was known about the death worm in the West. In recent years, investigators have been able to look for evidence of the creature's existence. Ivan Makrel, one of the leading Loch Ness Monster detectives, studied the region and interviewed many Mongolian people about the worm. Due to the sheer volume of sightings and strange deaths, he came to the conclusion that the death worm was more than just a legend. Nobody is entirely sure what the worm actually is. Experts are certain it is not a real worm because the Gobi Desert is too hot an area for annelids to survive. Some have suggested it might be a skink, but they have little legs and scaly skin, whereas witness accounts specify the worm is limbless and smooth body. The most probable explanation is that the death worm is a new species of Amphisbaenia, or worm lizard, a group of burrowing reptiles. Although the native Mongolian people are convinced of the death worm's nature, it will take more years of research to satisfy the rest of the world's scientific community. In 2005, an expedition from the Center for Fortean Zoology crossed 1,000 miles of the Gobi on the track of the death worm. They concluded it was probably a large, unknown type of worm lizard and that the powers attributed to it were apocryphal. It sounds like a fantastic, lethal creature that might be found in a 1950s pulp science fiction novel, or sci-fi television movie, but some people believe that a large, deadly worm-like creature called the Mongolian death worm exists in the Gobi Desert. According to British biologist Carl Schuker in his book The Unexplained, an illustrated guide to the world's paranormal mysteries, 2002, Metro Books, one of the world's most sensational creatures may be concealed amid the sands of the southern Gobi Desert. It is said to resemble a large fat worm, up to 1 meter, 3 feet, long and dark red in color, with spike-like projections at both ends. It spends much of its time hidden beneath the desert sands, but whenever one is spotted lying on the surface it is scrupulously avoided by the locals. Seeking the death worm. Despite, or perhaps because of, the creature's fearsome name, they don't call it the Mongolian happiness worm. After all, many intrepid explorers have set out into the Gobi Desert seeking the beast. Numerous organized expeditions and searches have been conducted over the years, by both independent researchers and in conjunction with television shows. Despite extensive searches, eyewitness interviews, and even setting traps for the beast, all have come back empty-handed. Many of those who believe in the creature acknowledge that there is no hard evidence of its existence, but instead, believe that legends and stories about it must have some basis in historical truth. The descriptions, mostly second and third-hand stories, from different places and times are too similar, they believe, to be anything but independent eyewitness reports. From a folkloric perspective, however, this is simply a sign that legends and stories of the death worm have spread throughout the region, as commonly happens through trade and travel. Many people around the world can offer very similar descriptions of dragons, leprechauns, mermaids, and other fantastic, presumably non-existent, creatures, not from personal experience but from hearing about them from others. So is there a real animal behind the stories and legends? It seems doubtful. Compared to the North American Bigfoot or the Himalayan Yeti, for which there are dozens or hundreds of alleged footprints or photographs, for example, there is virtually no evidence of its existence. Consider also that no live or dead ones have been found. Every other creature known to exist has left behind a dead body or skeleton. In fact, the goby would likely preserve the carcasses of the animals due to the relative lack of predators and hot desert winds that slow decomposition. Inhabitants of the goby are aware of the global interest in their mystery monster, as well as offers of rich rewards for one of the creatures, alive or dead, and if one was found, it would surely come to light. Legends and evidence. A zoological perspective may help us sort facts from fiction and the legend of the Mongolian death worm. First of all, we should not be misled by the worm in its name. That's an English translation. The creature, if it exists in the inhospitable Gobi Desert, could not be a soft, fleshy worm. Instead, it is likely a type of snake or legless lizard. This also means it would be a vertebrate animal with a spine that would presumably be found by searchers. A variety of explanations have been offered for the animal, including perhaps a misidentified or new species of snake. The consensus among researchers such as Schuker and author Richard Freeman is that the Mongolian death worm likely does not exist, and the belief is instead based upon sightings of either a type of limbless reptile known as the worm lizard, which resembles a large worm, burrows underground and can reach several feet in length, or a type of sand boa snake. Of course, not all the characteristics of the worm lizard or sand boa are a perfect match for the death worm. For example, terrestrial snakes can deliver lethal electric shocks, the way that electric eels can, for example, can. For that matter, several venomous snakes, primarily cobras and vipers, can spit poison, which, although not acidic, can certainly cause harm and blindness. Yet these reputed characteristics are based not on hard data but on myths and stories. Some accounts of the death worm even claim that its venomous spill can corrode metal instantly, which is physically impossible. With allowances made for the exaggeration found in rumor, legend, and folklore, the worm lizard or the sand snake seem likely candidates. It is, of course, possible that the Mongolian death worms exist. Of course, there would have to be more than one of them to sustain what biologists call a breeding population, likely tens or hundreds of thousands of them. Perhaps next week, next month, or next year, such a bizarre creature will be found and examined by scientists. Until then, it seems likely that Roy Chapman Andrews' assessment nearly a century ago was correct. The creature is merely a legend.